wonderful time for us to come together, learn who we are, and be able to celebrate who we
All right, so we got the Ivri Hebrew heritage fact. So Ivri means Hebrew. So we're going to talk about a lot of the continuation of the Ethiopians. The reason why I went over them and made sure we showed those videos about how the Ethiopian, the Beta Israel Jews, how their story started from Ethiopian, knowing that they were ancient customs and how they went back to Israel. But now we want to talk about how those Ethiopian Jews or the Beta Israel, how they went left into West Africa, right? So the same group of people, not only, modern day went to Israel, now are the Beta Israel, or, the derogatory word we shouldn't be using, the Falasha Jews, what do they call them? Foreign Jews or something. Falasha means foreign or something. So we don't want to call them that. We want to call them Beta Israel, the house of Israel Jews, or Israelites, or the Ethiopian Jews or Ethiopian Israelites, because they actually said they came from the 10 tribes, Dan, and some of them say they came from Solomon and Sheba and all that. But some of them also went left to West Africa. So that's the reason why it's so important to understand their history, because like I showed y'all in my own DNA, there's Ethiopian Jew, right? So in your DNA, there's a big chance that it says Ethiopian Jew in yours. So why do we have that trace of Ethiopian Jew as they migrated onto West Africa? Some of them came through Axum and other places in Ethiopia as well. So we want to make sure we give our fair use, just so people know that we're using this for criticism. Definitely the first video. Comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. This is not our materials. We want to make sure people know that. And these are not our views. So these views expressed in the video solely those of the author, and they do not necessarily reflect the opinions or position of Mamleket Kohanim or his affiliates. So I want to make sure we go through that. All right. So the first one's going to be talking about, this is going to actually be the second one. Let's do the second one. But this is the second one. So this is a guy, Henry Abrahamson. He talks a lot about Jewish, modern day Jewish history and how it actually comes and what he talks about. So he's going to talk about this guy, the amazing journey of Eldad the Danite. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because I want to show you the version that comes from their community first, right? Because a lot of people try to discredit this Eldad the Danite. They're saying it's a myth. This guy's not real. It's a made up story. So I'm going to show you what their community say about him first. And then the next video, going back one slide, is the one from our community, Will, Son of Yah. And he's going to show you some of the resources and information that talks about Eldad the Danite and how he had stories of people going west, Israelites going west, right? And the Henry Abrahamson videos, you're going to hear what he's going to talk about how they went east. So just want to make sure you pay attention to that while we play these videos, because even the Henry Abrahamson, he's the one that actually talked negative towards the Limba that got our elder Cohen Hamadichi very upset in the Limba people, because he was saying something about the women that had to go through some bad things, had to go through ant hills, and they had to do all this stuff to be converted, and they said it wasn't true at all, and they felt very offended by it. So just want to make sure you know what these faces is. Hopefully you're keeping track of that. Things on our site as well, and I still haven't released that video, even though it is out there. I wanted to put some edits to it so people could hear from the scholars against what he was saying. No, because sometimes people need to want to see a different face than ours. So I want them to see what the experts say versus what he says. So it takes me some time to edit that, because I'm not a master editor, and got to put lessons together and work and stuff. So that's why we need volunteers to do some of this. But just want to make sure you see that piece. All right. So I'll stop it where it needs to be as well.
Hello, fellow students of Jewish history. In connection with the upcoming Kosher River cruise to the Antarctic, which is not going to be a river cruise but will be kosher, I'm continuing this series of discussion of Jewish explorers in history. And I'd like to speak with you now about one fascinating figure named Eldad the Danite, also known as Eldad the Danite, because he claimed to have come from the tribe of Dan. So here's the story. It's really bizarre. This individual shows up in Kairouan, you can see where that is in modern-day Tunisia, in the late 9th century, in the year 883. And he has an amazing claim. He tells the people living there that he actually comes from the biblical kingdom of Chavila, which is mentioned 5 times in Tanakh, and it's associated especially with precious metals like gold and things like that. Now, the actual location of Chavila has never been definitively determined, but the way that Eldad describes it, it probably is somewhere on one of the banks of the Red Sea, either in contemporary Yemen or maybe in contemporary Ethiopia, Somalia, something like that. But at any rate, what he has to say about this place is absolutely phenomenal.
All right, so notice some of the places that he's talking about. He had the circles, right? So it's important to kind of understand what's going on. So one of the places that he has is North Africa, right? And that's very close to Europe, right? So, and then the ones at the bottom is the one he says he came from, which was East Africa around Ethiopia and Yemen. And that's very important because Yemen is in our DNA as well. As I showed you our DNA in the past, mine, it shows some Yemen, right? And that's the same place the Limba say you came from Jordan to Yemen down to Mozambique down to Zimbabwe, and that's where they built the great city of Zimbabwe. And then some of them moved to South Africa and other places as well. So it's important to understand those two places because we even showed some earlier videos is that when the Israelites, when the temple fell in 70 AD, some went to Egypt, Israelites, and some went down to Saudi Arabia, down to Yemen. So, and then later on, those Yemenites end up going through West Africa, and you know, some people say they're connected to the Moors, some people say they're not, but they end up going into Spain and Portugal, during we call Iberia during that time. So, it's important to understand these migrations, and whenever these people say stuff, where are they pointing to? What are the countries? And then when we do our DNA workshop, you look at your DNA, then you can say, hey, why is my DNA in those same places, right? So just keep track of those things as we show these videos and start having these conversations because it's very important. And then even because what I'm going to do later on, y'all willing, is start showing you some of the tribes that actually say they went through this migration, right? So if you don't know what the migration is, it's like this is just lost knowledge, right? But as we start talking about what Eldad said from way back then when he claimed that he was an Israelite and all that stuff, you can start marking the next video, start talking about some of the migrations and some of the history there. So keep track of that. Please do. All right. Thank you.
Says in, by the way, perfect Hebrew, which is apparently the only language he knows, that he is actually a member of the otherwise lost tribe of Dan. This is one of the 10 tribes that inhabited the northern part of Israel, and they were essentially lost to history after the invasion of the Assyrians in the 8th century before the Common Era. Dan, he says, fled early or migrated early to avoid the onslaught of the Assyrians, and also with some other interesting motivations, and they made their way down to Chavila where they settled. And later, after the Assyrian invasion of Israel, several other tribes, specifically Gad, Asher, and Naphtali, made their way to Chavila as well, and he lives beside them. It's an amazing story, and basically the people of Kairouan listen to this and they're boggled with the possibility there's actually a Jewish kingdom living in this region, not so far away from them. Is it possible? Furthermore, what Eldad tells them is that they've been there, for 1,600 years, and the Judaism they practice is somewhat different from the Jews of Kairouan. Specifically, they lack certain historical holidays that began after the Assyrian invasion, like the holiday of Purim, which takes place in the period of the Babylonian exile, which is 100-odd years later. And also that everything they do is in Hebrew, including their Talmud. And the Talmud that we have today in the standard tradition is written in Aramaic, both in Jerusalem, or really in the land of Israel. We call it the Jerusalem Talmud, though it's really written a little further to the north. Or the Babylonian Talmud, written in Aramaic. His Talmud, moreover, not only is it in Hebrew, not in Aramaic, it also lacks a whole bunch of the names of rabbis who are quoted in our Talmuds because they lived many hundreds of years later after the dispersal of the 10 tribes, like Rabbi Akiva.
So he said one thing that he spoke a ancient Hebrew that was different than theirs. So he acknowledges that the Hebrew that he spoke was older than the Hebrew that they were speaking at the time that he was living in the different areas that he was visiting, right? So he's going to talk a little bit more about that too. But then his customs were older as well. So, remember I was telling you about First Temple Judaism versus Second Temple, where a lot of the Babylonian customs came in, and days like Nisan and some of the Tammuz and some of the pagan Babylonian things came and got mixed in. And that's what Yahusha was calling out when he came. He said, you follow the traditions of your fathers and stuff, traditions of men and all that type of stuff. So we can see that at this time, the northern tribe was taken away before Babylon, the southern tribe, Judah, was taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, right? So we can see that they didn't have those customs, so he shouldn't have the customs if he says he's from Dan. So it basically justified his story, right? And they're going to be testing him. You'll see some more of that information. But be careful, because now they're going to try to say who is the current day authority on Judaism. So that's when you're going to start hearing some of the twisting and some of the special wordplay and stuff. I already heard some of it already. You might have already heard some of it, and maybe some of y'all have missed it. But he's kind of like saying, oh, yeah, it's a real story, but, so start listening to how he's going to twist some of that too. All right.
And Rabbi Meir and so on, these great rabbis are not mentioned in their Talmud, although their Talmud, he says, comes to the same conclusions. But there are some details that are different.
So you hear what he says, that he didn't know about all that. Eldad didn't know about all those what do you call them, rabbis or scribes, or I don't like saying rabbis, but all their people that they have basically noteworthy. He didn't know nothing about them, right? But then he tries to say like that, but they came to the same conclusion. Well, it's like, what? So he said they came to the same conclusion, but keep listening, because he's going to say that they're going to find out that some of them say that the current day, modern day is the right way, and theirs is not, and stuff. So how did they come to the same conclusion if they didn't have some differences, right? So just keep your ear attuned to that. Like I said, that wordplay going back and forth and stuff like that. All right.
For example, the way that they slaughter animals to make them kosher is not exactly the same as the rabbinic tradition. So that prompts the people of Kairon, the elders, to send a letter all the way out to Baghdad, where you have the Geonim. This is the great Talmudic center of the 9th century. And they say to them, hey, this guy showed up here. He told us this amazing story. He speaks a beautiful Hebrew. And he says these things about, we're not doing shchita, we're not slaughtering animals for kosher consumption the way they do. And so they asked Rabbi Tzemach Gaon, one of the great leaders of the academy at the time, is this guy for real? Is his story true? And if his story is true, then what about the way he practices Judaism? Are we doing the wrong thing maybe? So fascinatingly, Rabbi Tzemach Gaon writes back, he's the real deal. Yes. And you know how we know? Because he was here before he came to you. And he quotes how several elders actually interviewed him in Baghdad as well. So this is someone who claims to come from the southern Arabian Peninsula, maybe Eastern Africa, makes his way up to Babylonia, to where the Baghdad Gaonate is actually. And then from there, he makes his way all the way over to Qumran. And we also have another tradition, which was written a few hundred years later, but also citing actual witness testimony from Chastai ibn Shaprut, who lived in the 10th century in southern Spain, in Al-Andalus, who also say that he was there as well. So definitely, Eldad Hadani gets around. He's traveling all around the known world with this amazing story of the independent Jewish kingdom of Chavila. His story as a whole, by the way, is absolutely fascinating. He talks about how he and a colleague were shipwrecked, and then they were seized by cannibals who ate his friend, and he talks all about how he escaped and how really fascinating how the Jewish community is organized in Chavila. They're very military. They defend their territory. He talks about the amazing river Sambation, which is also mentioned in the Talmud, this fantastic river that apparently flows with rocks so violently during 6 days of the week that nobody can cross it. But on the Sabbath, it amazingly rests. And theoretically, it could be crossed at that point, but the people who live beyond the river Sambation are very religious Levites, and they do not want to cross and violate the Sabbath, so they stay in their area, trapped, as it were, by this remarkable river. So, wow, what an incredible story. Now, we have all kinds of difficulties trying to parse.
All right, just notice he talks about this man is coming from this place down in Africa. What haven't you heard him say yet? You haven't heard him say that he's black. So he has this ancient culture. He's going all around these different places. They saying his customs are older. It's legit. So what does that mean for them, right? Like in some of their more modern ways of doing things and stuff, right? So, but you can also hear, like, if you've been with us for a while, you can hear some of the videos that, historians and people from Europe and other people talking about the limba, and they said that their customs are more ancient than the modern day Judaism. So, why aren't they given the same recognition or the same credit as some of the Jewish people are trying to promote? But they say that other Jewish people are trying to, associations are trying to push them down and hide this stuff. Wow. So that's what I'm saying. You got to know the difference. You can't just hate all Jewish people. That's wrong. Just like in our community, we have some people that are, those that are trying to work against our interests, but they try to act like they're doing something positive for us, but they're actually doing something negative, even in the Israelite community. So we got to be careful about who we associate with as well. So, there are some things that's happening where they're trying to, so like the custom of you're Jewish based upon the mother side, when the Bible says it's based upon the father side. Stuff like that. Where did that come from? When did that change? So we got to start asking those questions and understand what Yahushua was really fighting. Because a lot of people try to say when he was talking about the traditions of your fathers, people say, oh, that's Christianity. But wait a minute. The Messiah hadn't even died and wasn't even crucified yet. So that's where Christianity is supposed to came from. Is after his death, that's when they started. But he's talking about the traditions before he died. So what traditions are he attacking? What is it? Traditions is he attacking at that time? Right? So we got to understand what the differences are and what that actually means for us now as we're waking up, not to get caught up in the wrong things, right? Because some of that is paganism, even in some of the Judaism, right? And some of those customs as well. All right.
This story. One of the big issues is the earliest texts that we have of this story were written down hundreds of years after Eldad lived. We do know from the multiple documents from both Tzemach Gaon, the Jews of Qumran, and Chastai ibn Shaprut, that he was a real person and he did come with some kind of story, but we don't know how much of it was actually what Eldad was saying and how much of it was embellishments by later readers and copyists who just wanted to add to the amazing qualities of this story. But that begs one more question, like, okay, so there was an Eldad who claimed to be a Danite coming from a Jewish kingdom. Was he really the real deal? So Tzemach Gaon, as we mentioned, and ironically, much later rabbinic opinion, says, yes, his story is for real. it corresponds with so much of what we know in Midrashim and in the Talmud and so on about the history of the Jews. And so his story, it checks out. You know, we met with him, we interviewed him, he had all these facts, we were able to confirm them with other documents. So yeah, evidently there is some kind of thing happening there that's a Jewish kingdom. However, they disagreed with his halachic analysis and said, but the Jewish tradition follows the Babylonian Talmud. That's how we determine the halacha. You should not follow his method of shchita and all kinds of things like that. Lots more room to discuss.
That's why I was talking about the wordplay. So at the beginning, he said that his customs are more ancient, is right, and all that. But now they're saying, oh no, something happened with the writings, and somebody added something to it, even though originally it was right, but now it's not right. And you know, the original, I mean, the more authoritative one is the Babylonian Talmud. So that's the Second Temple period. So, you know, he's just saying all what I just said in a couple of sit-ins playing wordplay. First it was, oh yes, he has this, he's a real person. Now, oh no, some of the stories were made up. You see what I'm saying? It's that wordplay that's happening. So they do that a lot in our community, not just in this history, but all Black history is always, oh yes, that's a real person, but, you know, the buts that always gets us. Oh, but this, and then you have people saying, oh, that's a red herring. You know, don't listen to that. You know, I had a guy talking to me on Facebook, and I try to tell people about the limba in our Black little group, and somebody came and said, oh no, that's a red herring. You know, the limba or have some Shemitic DNA, but you know, nobody can say it's connected to African Americans. And but he didn't say nothing about the part around the limba, the Buba tribe is connected to the Kohanim gene that even the Jewish people today, they say that are the Levites. So you know, if that's not right for him, for the Limba tribe, that means they should get rid of it for everybody. But they won't do that, right? It's okay over here, but over for you, there's a but included in it, right? You have it, but, you know, you have more of it, but, and that's the issue that's coming in. So now they're trying to discredit the Limba. They're trying to discredit anything that's connected to any of the people, just like with Eldad the Danite. If you go to other sites, they'll say, oh, no, none of that true stuff is true. It's all bad. It's all fake. But now you just heard him at the beginning saying it was all true. And I mean, in other sites, they'll say it was all fake, nothing is true. But you just heard him at the beginning of the site saying that all this stuff was true and was confirmed and vetted even by the other leaders of the time. So, you know, make sure that you don't get swayed by people just being authoritative. You know, sometimes people, like the guy said, oh, I'm a historian. I'm like, okay, what organization you come from? Couldn't tell him. He didn't say. But then he was like, oh, I got this. I'm a, you know, Dominican Republic historian. I'm like, I got this information from the Dominican Republic historians. So now you're contradicting the same, but, you know, they'll use those words saying, oh, I'm a historian, I'm a professional. Oh, yeah, this is from scholars say this. If they don't name scholars, if they're not citing sources, if they're not telling you what they got their information, why are they going to come against your information, right? So just keep that in mind at all times, because we got, like I said, got to be those confident people and understanding once we do our own DNA test, you do your own lineage of your family. That's the reason why we do those workshops. Then you are confident in saying, hey, this is not just something people came up with. You do some history about the people and the migrations and the tribes that you come from. Then you know for sure people can't take that away from you. So that's the reason why we do this in Memleket Kohanim, is trying to interview some of those tribes so you can get some firsthand experience where, you know, a lot of our people on this side, you know, some of us still dealing with some of the curses, right? We're not the ones that have a lot of money to be able to go fly around and do all those things. And that's why we're thankful for the people that's giving donations for us to be able to do so and send stuff over to people over there that we know, so we don't have to have that big cost of flights and stuff. I know sometimes people say want me to go over there, but I'm like, I got a regular job. I'm not a pastor with a salary and jets and all that kind of stuff. So I'm like, let's find somebody over there already that we know that we can trust and send them to go interview chiefs and find historians and stuff like that. So it's very important for that we get our information from our own people, from our own viewpoint, as long as they're not sold out either. So we can be able to make better decisions and, you know, be able to pass our traditions on to our children as well. All right.
By the way, the second opinion, which is more characteristic of Jewish historical scholarship, particularly in the 19th century and beyond, people like the great Heinrich Gretz, who wrote that this guy is a charlatan. He's there as a swindler. He made up this big story. in the text that we have, there's no ask for money or things like that, but they assume that he must be kind of trying to swing some angle. And what he really did was he read up all these midrashim, which means he's a very learned person, and he concocted a story that that was based on these ideas. Like, for example, we know about the river Sambatyon from Talmudic passages. He read about it, and then he described it as a place where he lived. So he's really, though, trying to scam the communities that he's going to. That's kind of like the second opinion. The third opinion, which is raised by Professor Micha Perry from the University of Haifa, who recently wrote a book about Eldad the Danite, says that, well, there's one third possibility, that he is a true believer. He actually does claim, honestly, he comes from a place called Chavila, or whatever that place was, because the text could be corrupted. And the people that he lives among believe that they are descended from the tribe of Dan, perhaps living next door to people from Gad and Asher and Naphtali. But this we do find in Jewish history as well, that there are sometimes spontaneous communities who associate themselves with the much older Jewish traditions of those mysterious lost tribes. There are like dozens of examples of peoples that say, oh, we're really from Menashe, or we're from this or from that, and we simply have no way of really validating the veracity of those historical claims. Some seem far more reasonable than others, but it could be that he is incorrect, and this is like sort of a more spontaneous community that somehow developed this tradition amongst themselves. He could also be a charlatan, and he could also be a true believer. I mean, all of these things are possible, but at any rate, it's an amazing story of a fascinating Jewish explorer from the 9th century. I hope we'll be able to speak in person on this amazing exploration to the Antarctic. I know it's not going to be for everybody. It's a pretty, daunting enterprise, but I hope to share my research with you as I'm preparing the lectures for that. Thank you very much for watching.
Right. So you can see a lot of the stuff, and they got a little trip that they're going on, paying this man, but that's why I think it's important for us. Not talking about me. I know there's other people that know even more than me, but we should be supporting people. When they write a book in our community, when they do those things, we should be supporting them, because they're basically documenting our history, even if some things are not exactly right based upon what we know. How will we ever get that until we start having that information and sharing it, right? So that's why I say it's important, no matter if you're a Christian, if you're Israelite, if you're Muslim, if you're an atheist, and you come across this channel, you need to make sure you get accurate information, do the history. Don't just try to disprove something, but try to get an understanding of where this information is coming. So the same way you look at information on our community, saying, oh, that's black people stuff, and they try, we should be judging the other communities the same way, right? But people won't do that, right? They'll be like, oh, no, don't say that against these people, but these people over here, they're nothing. They don't know what they're talking about. They're ignorant. We're not listening. It'd be our own people. People that look like us, we reject. But anybody else from any other community, they say something aggressively with, yes, this is what the scholars say. We want to jump behind them and say, oh yeah, look what he says, right? So we got to make sure that we show value to our own people and also try to preserve that history. So that's what we're trying to do at Memleket Kohanim. And some of the people there, who are Jewish, they shared information with me. One time they invited me after I spoke at one of my past companies. They had me to speak about who we were. And then some of the Jewish people listened to me, and they were like, oh, I know about that. And they invited me to go to the synagogue and send me information about black Jews and everything else. So, we got to preserve that information, though. How do we share that information? How do we, get it out? So children will grow up knowing this and won't be like we're always seeking for information and everybody's trying to be the best YouTube star out there and not share other people's information. I think that's just crazy to me. And other people are not looking at other people's video. I don't look at nobody's video. I just get the stuff straight out, myself. Like, why would we do that? Why don't we share information so you can be a specialist in this area, let that person be a specialist in that area, and then we'll keep on growing more and more of that knowledge, and then we share among each other. So that's what we got to do, especially now since they're making here in North Carolina and other states, Florida, the critical race theory. They're trying to say, oh, this take away black history from school. They're talking about getting rid of the African American Museum or defunding it in some ways. So it's like all our history is getting ready to be gone. So, if it's up to us to preserve it. right? And to share it and not to fight about little details, but to share information, let everybody to consume that information on their own, at least give them access to the information, just like any other subject or anything else that's out there. All right. So now we're going to do Will of Yah and Will Son of Yah. I think that's his name. And he has a lot of good information, you know, like I said, before they start taking down people's channels and stuff. He talks about Eldad the Danite, and he's going to talk about how he says the Havila comes from West Africa instead of East Africa. And he's going to show French sources that he's going to translate to give you a better understanding. So this is a short of it. He got one that's like 4 hours, which is great information. You know, we shouldn't be scared of information that somebody takes and compiles in order to give to us. It makes it easier. He has one about the, you know, they were talking about the river, the Shabbatia or something. He talks about that for like an hour, and it's good. We might even show portions of that next Shabbat, y'all willing. But I want you to hear this version of how he got the resources and how he basically is showing, got to cite his sources. You know, I don't remember seeing any. Did they show any citations that last video at all? Just saying stuff, and people are like, oh, he's authoritative, you know, yeah, what he says is right. And then he starts talking negative about the Limba people, and we, oh yes, okay, they're you know, hazing their women, and you know, we'll take that as authoritative just because somebody says, oh, I am the person you need to listen to, right? But he's the black man, got to show all kind of citations and stuff like I do to make sure people just believe it in just a little bit, right? And then they still reject it. Oh, that ain't true. So let us play this video and get you a chance to listen to our people.
Eldad the Danite. These traditions are important because they recant one of the earliest Israelite diasporas known throughout all of Jewish history. It was even written in the Talmudic writings. So let's deal with the history of Eldad ben Maḥli. The oral traditions of Eldad begins in the land of Israel during the time of Jeroboam's secession and the time of the split of the kingdom of Israel. Specifically, during this time, King Jeroboam wanted the Danites to make war against the tribes of Judah. However, instead of shedding blood against their brother and making war against their brother, they proclaimed throughout all the land of Dan to fly to Egypt and kill all the inhabitants of Egypt. But how could you fly to Egypt as one of the princes? Is it not written throughout the law that ye shall see them again no more? However, it is said that God gave the Danites good advice to go up the river Pishon and to continue their wanderings on camels and to encamp into the land of Cush. After growing plentiful year after year, it is said that 3 other tribes, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, came and encamped with the Danites within the land of Cush. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to this story and this history, many authors and historians.
So he said they came into the land of Cush, right? So a lot of people think Cush, Ethiopia, is that little country Abyssinia that became now Ethiopia. No, Cush was a bigger territory, and even during modern times, they used to even reference Africa as Ethiopia, all of Africa as Ethiopia. I mean, like African Americans used to instead of First African Baptist Church, sometimes they had First Ethiopian Baptist Church, you know, back in the day. And then that little country Abyssinia took on the name Ethiopia. So a lot of people nowadays accredit Ethiopia with that little country, not to, you know, make it derogatory, because that's the only country that didn't get colonized, other than people say Liberia, but that was a different story. But then, so when you think about, when they say Cush in Ethiopia, think about all of Africa, right? Majority parts of Africa there. And then, you know, he's talking about like the other tribes that went, like Gad. So if you know about the Igbo, they say they come from Eri, the son of Gad. So you can start putting some of this stuff together. So that's why we're going through these videos and getting, so you got to make sure you keep track of some of this. And the best way to keep track of it, as I keep saying, is you do your own DNA. You find out what tribes you come from. So that now that makes it more personal for you. And you probably be better at remembering, because you say, oh, this is my people, right? These are the people where I come from. So that's the reason why it's so important for you to do those workshops, or at least find out, you know, if you're scared of DNA and history, which people don't realize hospitals are selling people's DNA and stuff like that, or people are hacking into hospitals and getting their DNA. But if it's important that you got a cousin or uncle or whoever DNA you know that did a DNA test, see if you can use their test and do the same things, and you will know about yours. Because once again, if your uncles or your aunts or your cousins' DNA, they did theirs, they basically got your DNA too. So it's best for you to know about your own DNA because they got theirs in there, and they can do the same test and whatever they're going to do to you as well. All right. So just want to make sure you understand that the migration part that he's talking about from Eldad the Danite and some of this history is very important, that he's talking about to connect it back to us. All right.
Failed to continue the story of Eldad, falling short within the boundaries of Cush. But indeed, we can go further west. So let's dig into that. Now to do that, we'll be looking into the French source Relation d'Eldad the Danite to get some further insight, because interestingly, they go deeper into this history. We'll be beginning on page 28, and everything we'll be reading from specifically will be highlighted to the left, and the translation will be to the right. So, beginning on page 28, it reads, "At that time, several families of 3 other tribes of Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali also went out and encamped in Arabia until they reached the borders of Cush. They made war on the Cushites and killed so many that they depopulated a space of 4 days by 4 days to the place occupied by their brothers of the race of Dan, having chosen Havilah as his home, which should not be confused with the eastern Havilah, where there is gold, and Seba, and Sabta, and Ramah, and Sabat Cha, and Sheba, and Dedan. These 4 tribes, Dan, Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali, were forced to fight against these 7 kingdoms." Page 29. "Soon they made the heads of their enemies bow before them, and established themselves in their places in these 7 kingdoms. Nevertheless, every year until today, they are in hostility with 7 other tribes, forming as many sovereignties, called the Mani, Kabar, Koratia, Bedra, Nabat, Aur, and Yoba. As a result of these continuous wars, many Israelites were scattered beyond the rivers of Cush, so that the word of the prophet would be fulfilled. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my scattered worshippers will bring me my offering." So thus far, after reading this book, we've gained insight on the fact that 4 tribes, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, made their way into the land of Cush before continuing beyond the rivers of Ethiopia into a land known as Havilah. And they said specifically not to be confused with the eastern Havilah. So if not the eastern Havilah, then where is the Havilah that Eldad was making mention to? Interestingly, if we take a look into the book, The Itinerary of Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela, he mentions something very, very similar that connects to what Eldad was claiming. So if we start on page 146, it reads, "From Aswan."
So now he's making the point that, the other guy said that they came from the east side, right? Over there by Ethiopia. So what point he's saying is that it's not the east one, it's one that was in the west. So now he's going to explain what does that mean. So based upon the findings that he saw, right? So he's basically saying they're in West Africa, not in East Africa. The Havilah that Eldad the Danite came from was West Africa. All right.
On to Chula, 12 days. This place contains about 300 Jews and is the starting point of the caravans who transverse the desert Al-Tahara or Al-Sahara in 50 days on their way to Zavila, the Chavila of Scripture, which is in the country of Ghana. So interestingly, Rabbi Tudela says that this Chavila or Savila or Havila, is in the country of Ghana. And we know that this is specifically in West Africa and not in East Africa, because on page 146, he goes on to say that this country lies westward of Cush or Abyssinia. But let's dig deeper into that. And to do that, we're going to go to Archives More Arcanes.
So one thing I want you to let you know is that when he says Ghana, he's not talking about, I don't think he's talking about this time, the current country Ghana in West Africa that got their independence later on, or more modern time, during the time around Martin Luther King time. You know, that's when they got their independence. He's talking about the ancient Ghana that was more in Mauritania, like in the Mali area, around Senegal and around that area. That was the ancient called Ouagadougou, the city of gold. So this is where a lot of the West African traditions even come from, is that ancient Ghana, not the current modern day Ghana. Okay, so keep track of that too. All right, thank you.
Volume 6, on page 68, it mentions something very, very interesting. It says quite simply that Eldad calls Negritia by the name of Havila. And last time I checked, Negritia is the name of West Africa. So we actually have two Jewish historians, Rabbi Benjamin as well as Eldad the Danite, placing Havila within West Africa. Is this because places like Ghana is referenced as the land of gold as well? But let's continue to dig into this history. And to do that, we're going to try to identify one more location that Eldad made mention to, and that is the Sambonyon River. So let's go to a history of the Jewish people to get a little bit more information on the details surrounding this Sambonyon River. Starting on page 278. It reads, Eldad, son of Maḥli the Danite, alleged that he was a descendant of the tribe of Dan. He related that this tribe had immigrated from their Palestinian home so as not to take part in the civil war at that time of Jerusalem's secession. And were residing in the land of Havila beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. 3 other tribes, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, were with them. These had joined them in the times of Sennacherib. Opposite them lived the children of Moses, sprung from those Levites who had mutilated the fingers of their right hand rather to sing the songs of Zion by the rivers of Babylon, and had then been translated by a cloud to their present abode. His own people, so Eldad continued, were able to communicate with them only from afar, since they were cut off from one another by a waterless torrent which carried masses of sand and rubble with such terrific force that it could crush an iron mountain. This impassable river rested on the Sabbath day when it was enveloped in a thick mist. Hence the river was named Sambonyon. Now after reading this, a river didn't necessarily pop up in my head. Now let's reread over these details to get an understanding of exactly what Eldad was talking about. It says, his own people, so Eldad continued, were able to communicate with them only from afar, since they were cut off from one another by a waterless torrent, which carried masses of sand and rubble with such terrific force that it could crush an iron mountain. This impassable river rested on the Sabbath day when it was enveloped in a thick mist. Hence, the river was named Sambonyon. So after reading this again, it really sounds as if Eldad was describing a desert. If we go back to the itinerary of Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela, he describes the Sahara Desert that the Jews traverse the same way Eldad described the Sambonyon River. And it reads, from Aswan to Chula, 12 days. This place contains about 300 Jews, and is the starting point of the caravans who traverse the desert Al-Tahara in 50 days on their way to Sevilla, the Chavila of Scripture, which is in the country of Ghana. This desert contains mountains of sand, and whenever a storm arises, the caravans are exposed to the imminent danger of being buried alive by the sand. Alright, so now we're starting to see why Eldad described the Sahara Desert as a waterless torrent which carried masses of sand and rubble. Let's continue on to the empires of medieval West Africa, because this complements the traditions of Eldad as well. And it reads, on the southern fringe of the Sahara is the Sahel, a marginal area of transition from desert to savanna. Sahel is the Arabic word for shore. It is as if the Sahara were a great ocean of sand and rock. The camels that transport goods across the desert were ships, and the large market towns were the sea ports. Alright, so now we should definitely have an understanding of why Eldad referred to this desert, this Sahara, as a great ocean of sand and rock, as a waterless torrent. So now that we went through that information, let's go even deeper into proving that West Africa was the location of Eldad and his tribesmen. And to do that, we're going to visit another French source by the title of Archives Marocains, Volume 6. Starting on page 67, it reads, Eldad the Danite appeared in the cities of the coast of the Maghreb around 860 to 880. He had come from the desert, from Sudan.
So he said he came from the coastland of the Maghreb, right? And he showed some of North Africa. So I don't know if y'all remember, some of y'all, you took your DNA test. It said that you have some traces of the Maghreb. So that was one of the areas that we talked about during the workshop. So keep those things in mind. So, go pull out your DNA test and start looking to see if you can see any of these connections when we go over through these cultural heritage moments. All right. And also to let you know, that's his interpretation. He was trying to say that the Sahara Desert was that Sabbatean River. I think that's what he was making that connection to. But also remember, one of the things about it says that on the Sabbath it stopped, right? So we got to make sure we listen to some of his just like the other guy, but also think about does it fit all the qualifications of everything? So it's just another way of looking at it. All right.
Or Negritia, and claimed to belong to the independent Jewish tribes of the Danites, one of the 10 extinct tribes of Israel, which he said had immigrated from Ethiopia or Negritia. He spoke only Hebrew, but a special Hebrew, a dialect which differs from all that we know of this language and which could be linked to the Hebrew Phoenician. Apart from the Danites, his own tribe, they were in Negritia, according to him. 3 other tribes of Israel, enjoying all them a considerable political and material prosperity and making war on the Negro kingdoms situated in the desert and separated from the Israelites by a sabbatical river which drew during the week streams of sand and stone. Continuing on to the footnotes of page 67, it reads, the tribes of Dan would have come to Ethiopia from Egypt, while the 3 other Jewish tribes of Negritia, those of Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, would have come from Arabia, which confirms the hypothesis put forward by Mr. Lee Chandler on the origins of Jews in West Africa. Continuing on. It is difficult not to see in all this information, which is both reality and legend, data on the migrations of the Judaizing and Libo-Punic tribes driven back by the Muslims as far as the ocean and from there to the Sudan. Indeed, the existence of the Jewish independence in the Sahara around the 9th and 1st centuries is confirmed by the traditions of Kitab el-Adunai that we have already mentioned, as well as certain indications of other Arab historians, the most important of which is that of Qatar's. Continuing on to page 71, it reads, Eldad certainly visited certain Jewish tribes in the Sahara. He has heard many things said of certain others. He knows its uses and beliefs to the point that Mr. Epstein has succeeded in identifying them with those of the Falashas, whose common Hellenic origin with the ancient warriors of Caesarea had been supposed by us. It is also possible that he confused the Bene Musa with the powerful tribe of Masai, which he may not have visited himself, since we have managed to identify most of the names of Negro kingdoms with geographical names of the Adrar region of French Mauritania and even of Western Sudan. We would therefore not follow Mr. Epstein when he refuses to admit that West Africa was the country of origin of the Danite.
Say, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
So wait 1 second. You mean to tell me that authors actually refused to admit that West Africa was the country of origin of Eldad the Danite and his tribesmen? Is this why throughout history we always see this story referring to Ethiopian Jews opposed to West African? But let's continue to bring out this groundbreaking information and show where Eldad and his Israelite relatives settled within West Africa. Reading from page 71, it reads, we will devote a separate study to it among the geographical names given by Eldad and often manipulated by the copyists. We thought we could identify a certain number, of which here are a few: Adrar or Adrar, Todima or Kadima, Kukia, Kauntu or Kumtu, Toreka or Tekror, Tukulur, Kuba or Kechi, Karma or Kartas, and additionally, let us point out.
So one thing, he said was earlier when he was talking about the language, right? The ancient language being connected to West Africa. So I know some of you that is part of the Memleket Kohanim, my wife and one of my cousins, took the Eve class through Sayram that we interviewed. So she talks about a lot about how their language of the Eve people is connected to ancient Hebrew. And she brings out some of that stuff in her class as well. And you can even see here it says Tukulor, Tukeler, I think she has here. But I think that is also connected when I showed you during the workshop of that tribe in Senegal called Tukulor, right? So you can see how some of the names are very similar. And then we talk about, as part of that workshop, I think it's Tindirma. I might be wrong. But it's one of those areas where it was known that the Israelites lived, and then the Muslims came and forced them out, to force them down to, from like Algeria area down to West Africa. So, that was in the Maḥli area and stuff a little bit later on, the Maḥli Jews and stuff. So you can see how some of this stuff is being connected to some of the official sources, and that, even like I said, Jewish scholars even talk about some of these sources. But you even see how even in this, historians were battling about what they were trying to talk about in reference to Eldad the Danite. So, it's important to understand, don't just take stuff when people tell you stuff at word value. Look at some of those conversations and some of those arguments and what they were trying to say, because anybody can say they're a scholar and say whatever, right? So just want to make sure I brought some of that out. And I wish we can find some, some African people that could actually understand some of these names or know about these names. But there is some that, this lady, she goes around and talks about a lot of the tribes and how they connected to the Israelites. So we showed them to her before, but we might show some of those things also in the near future.
The names of Hohom and Zomaron, which we find in southern Morocco. Now let me read over those names one more time, just in case these locations went over your head. It reads, locations such as Adrar, Todima or Kadima, Kukuya, Kauntu or Kumtu, Toreka or Tukor, Tukulur, Kuba or Kechi, Karma or Kartas, and additionally Hohom and Zomaron in southern Morocco. So these West African territories is where these northern tribes settled and formed a kingdom, according to Eldad. Even if we continue, we'll find something else that's very confirming. And it reads, it must be added to this information that Eldad the Danite had been accompanied in his travels by another Jew of the desert who had traced his origin to the tribe of Asher, son of Jacob, or among the Mandi or Suniki tribes, of which some trace their origins to the chiefs of the tribes of Israel.
All right, so that's also important. So go to Will, Son of Yah's website. You got a lot of information, but you notice at the end he says connection to the Mandi and the Sinike, two other tribes we talked about as part of the workshop, right? Like my mom, I went to African ancestry, it said Mendi, right? And then my wife, she had some Sinike in her DNA, and I found a cousin that was connected to the Sinike tribe in Africa, that he was from Africa, and he said that he comes from the can't remember what kingdom that he came from, but it was one of the kingdoms, and his great grandfather was one of the kings of the kingdom and stuff. So that just shows you that we have some connection to these people in our DNA. And now that we know about the Sinike, I talked about the Sinike before and how they came from Egypt and went from Aswan, Elephantine Island, where they had the temple outside of Israel in Aswan, and they have traditions that they came from there, and they actually went to, and they were the ones that that started the I believe, were the ones that started the old Ghana Empire, Ouagadougou. Hopefully you saw that on one of the maps that he was showing the different places and the connections within the country of Africa. So that's what I'm saying. It's not just got to trace the breadcrumbs back, and it starts with yourself. So if you get your own DNA, find out what tribes you're connected to, because we're connected to multiple tribes. It's not just one. Might be one majority tribe, but it doesn't mean that you're not connected to the others, and start going back. So we even shows you how your DNA have connection to Morocco, and you have other connections of North Africa as well, where some of my African cousins, they're surprised that they have North Africa connections also. So it just shows you the connection of the Balfour people that he talked about in one of our earlier videos, and how they actually, the Daguerreotypes tribe, and even how the Jewish scholars, I should call them scholars just to avoid the R word, but the Jewish scholars at that time talked about how they actually came and end up being in like Maḥli and other areas through that same merchant connection of going from Israel down to West Africa also. All right. So we'll keep on talking about that, and hopefully you've been with us for the last couple of weeks and been able to keep track of some of this. But I also wanted to show you how people will try to change stuff up, and just because they're a scholar and you'll listen to them just because they don't look like us, that doesn't, you got to make sure you challenge everybody, not be partial, because we know partiality is even a sin based upon the Bible, especially when it even goes against your own people. So